The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
Today was a day of grotesque incompetence. I don't think I've ever been this disappointed with the 9-to-5 folks as I was today. So, I had projects to work on, and yet constantly, and this has become a very regular thing, I had no chance whatsoever to really concentrate on anything. I guess these folks just can't get enough of recreating the conditions of my last year before the layoffs, can they? If they want to make history repeat itself, I can finish what they started. They want to recreate the conditions, I can recreate the results. Because you know what? I've learned something in the last 5 years. Quite a bit. Actions speak louder than words, and deliberately undermining otherwise competent associates via overloading and constant criticism is not a good idea. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, and probably burn it in the process. Because of this, the great Sift continues. This thing is cleaned, and it has been dremeled. Took the new Dremel for a spin. Let me pick that up.
Epic fail.
As I was saying, I took the new Dremel for a spin and also burred off the edges so there are no sharp edges left, but an ATX power supply will fit in that. Unfortunately, because of the circumstances, I'm not doing anything more with this computer. Just gonna put the screws back in it. Gonna put the screws in a zip bag. Put the screws back in the computer. Put the screws back in the computer and put the computer back together. We'll worry about it later. We have a great Sift to finish up first. If history is going to repeat itself, then we want to hit the ground running when this nonsense goes down in the next couple of weeks. And here we are with the classic maintenance tech gaffe of only using a single screw to mount something. We just want this to be just enough put together in order to close the lid. I am going to have to find a few more screws, though, to put the panels back on. There's some special screws that can be used with the motherboard, something or another, those things that are supposed to be replacements for risers. So we'll keep those in the bag, and we'll keep all this stuff inside the computer, which is now nice and clean. Anyways, let's put this thing back together and put it aside. We won't be doing anything with it in the near future. Check it out. Tabletop. Woohoo! Yay! For those of you wondering what's got me so irked about the 9-to-5, the pinnacle of the stupidity today was we had a server unplugged on us. An old Windows Server 2003 server that used to be our site server is grotesquely obsolete in the process of being shut down for good, and the file server part of it had already been migrated off, but it was still running our print server, so all the printers that we very conveniently hooked up by doing right-click connect in Windows Explorer, all of a sudden every printer on a PC in the building stopped working except the ones that were set up manually. The very same Windows system engineer who couldn't be bothered to properly communicate with us when the file server service was being shut down, did the same thing when the printer server service was being shut down. So all of a sudden, boom, nothing prints, and destination host unreachable when we try to ping the thing. And this is on a day, by the way, when our IT guy is in Florida for 2 days, troubleshooting other technical issues. Yeah, the fun never stops. These two couldn't be bothered to communicate such that we couldn't be eased through that transition. So I took matters into my own hands. One of our network printers was a Xerox machine. I went and got Xerox's web-based installer, web-based driver downloader installer program, and I passed it around. I said, here, you can get the front office copier available as a printer again. Just click a few things and, like it gave him a list of instructions. I'm sure I'll return to a ton of emails and a very frustrated team on Monday, though. All this because some server engineer was living in his own little world or something like that, with no consideration for what his actions would do to the very people that are technically his customers. Right. Let's actually do something besides spin in the chair. Oh man, oh man, oh man! Really flexing some muscle here with my electronics roots. See that? That is a signal, although the Samsung panel is upside down. That's a signal from the dead monitor that had capacitor plague last February. Here's those horrible caps-on bulging piles of crap. I just pulled out and resoldered some of the replacement ones from the replacement kit. I actually still have the other capacitors over here as well. I actually do have some more capacitors that I could solder in, but I knew it was just the bulging ones that were killing this monitor. But now what we need to do is put this thing back together, and it'll be that much less clutter. It'll be that much less clutter, and well, we got 10 years out of this up to this point. Let's see if we can get another 10 years out of it. Nice. Just gotta figure out how to get the panel the right way. I think actually, something like that. Might not have all the original hardware, so we're gonna have to hack job putting this thing back together, because it's been apart for the better part of a year. Forget it. Just forget it. The latest thing to not go right with any of this. This thing snapped. Little tiny piece of crap.
Epic.
Went to go get one of the screws that was in the wrong place, and it just, yeah. This whole thing came off. Tried to get it to line exactly up and solder it back in, but the pins don't line up, so we get a white screen of death. Brilliant! It's not one thing, it's another today, huh?
Epic.
Well, it had a good run. 10 years, and it's Black Friday season, so it won't be hard to get another monitor. But darn! I had this thing working, too. It's just I had one of the screws in the wrong place, went back to get it, and this cable, well, flimsy little ribbon cables like this. It's just... Of course, this white screen of death tells me that I'm probably gonna have similar trouble with the panel on the Compact as well when I go to mess with that laptop with the dead battery and half-dead screen. This tiny little thing, theoretically, if I could find a board that goes in here for one of these, I could actually mount that in and get a new connector that way, because that's one of those tons of pins, things like that. I'd have to go really nutso with the soldering to come up with some hack job way of getting that working. And all I have is speaker wire. Ah, electronics. Gotta love it. Well, hard lesson learned, but I did get 10 years out of this thing at the very least. Samsung. Well, here's the power board with the capacitors that I just soldered in. They worked and everything. Past tense. You know, the lesson here is a very simple one. Haste makes waste, especially when you're on the edge of victory. This is how you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory right here. Because this worked. I had this working. The capacitors are good and everything. Now, everything on here is good now. Except, been in a bit too much of a rush to put the thing back together. Should have never left it apart for several months in the first place. Should document things as they come apart and other things as well. But at the very same time, I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna work, this is gonna work again, this is gonna work again, and this happened. Of course, the thing can get powered, the panel still works, but I can't find this board specifically under this cover that would replace this thing that snapped off on me. Electronics, man. You gotta be careful. Basically, slow and steady until it works again. Let me switch to something simpler than a display. Let's look at those speakers I've been meaning to take apart for X amount of time. And sadly, after all these years, been the Samsung 19-inch monitor. My first flat panel ever. Now officially retired. I just helped myself to the screws on the way out. By the way, while we're over here looking at this stuff, here's the board from the old fossil of an HP, right? It is an Asus board. I looked it up, and just like my K7M, it actually has a third RAM socket that was desoldered, probably to keep the RAM below a certain amount to properly support Windows 98, which capped at 512 megs before it crashed all over the place. Woohoo! Caps on. More like craps on. There's the reason why all this drama even happened with that monitor. What a pity. Next up, my childhood speakers, quite literally bookshelf speakers, because the only way I ever got any decent sound out of these things was to jam them into a bookshelf. So this is what it looked like together. Ran off of batteries or AC. Ran off of batteries or an AC adapter, and it had little things for bass boost, treble boost, circa late 1990s. Here's what one of those looks like taken apart. So I could rewire this with some speaker wire and maybe get some better cones for these to get them working again. The big thing with this is the wire would be too thick to come through. You know, this little post right here, and then it gets tied in so you don't accidentally pull the wire out that way and sever it. Let's see what kind of cones I used to listen to back in the day. It's definitely paper. It doesn't feel like very good paper. Let's take the speaker cone off, or let's take the driver off and see what it looks like. Oh, are you kidding me? 1990s Radio Shack. Seriously? Oh, the magnet's screwing with the viewfinder. Are you kidding me, 1990s Radio Shack? Not only is it screwed, but it's glued. Screwed and glued. Oh, that's one of the reasons why I got a new putty knife. Oh boy.
Epic fail.
Yay, paper! Screwed and glued. Well, I think some of the stuff that was like here was basically something for, it was basically a sealant of some sort to help with the airflow and the bass. Like this thing had any. You know, it was pretty sad, you know? Grew up thinking that. See, here's the thing. I grew up thinking that the speaker was doing this. It was this big. I thought the speaker was this big, and this was covering it up. No, actually. It was more like this. Well, the sound out of these things was never all that great. See, the reason why I wanted to take a look at these is to see if I could possibly buy some two-way automotive speakers where there's a woofer with a tweeter in the middle and maybe mount them inside this thing. That all depends on the radius of this. How big is this driver? Well, it's 4-inch. There is one of these, but that's square instead of round. I would have to mess around with pile thingies. Nah, I think let's do sort low to high. I don't want to be spending a lot of money on this crap. See, there's a GRS, but notice how big the driver is and how deep that magnet goes. It would probably sound better, but I don't think it really has the clearance. Plus, the driver that it's replacing is round, whereas all these car speakers I'm finding are square. So, out of stock until March. Wow. So no, I think this is it. I think we can bin those childhood speakers. Not even 4 ohms, 2 watts, and not even a speaker that was anywhere close to the size that I thought they were. No wonder these things never sounded good, unless I slammed them in a bookshelf somewhere. This one had the amp in it. I don't even want to look at the amp. Tacky piece of crapola. Alright, what's next to sift through? Actually, for completeness sake, and because I know folks will be like, dude, you should really show the whole darn thing. Here's the amp board and the other speaker. I took it apart, and yeah, so we got a little heat sink here. But here's the interesting part. Notice these capacitors. These are from the 90s. No bulging. Look at that. No bulging, no signs of draining or anything. There's a potentiometer with a volume, little chiclet caps for, I think this is probably the equalizer with these resistors and these little capacitors here. And yeah, there's your volume right here. It's a basic amplifier board. I theoretically I could take this out and, build something with it if I really wanted to, but I really don't think Oh man, you know, I'm really disappointed though at the whole shape of the speaker thing from earlier. Just, come on, man. Radio Shack. I know they always were a little on the tacky side back in the day, but to have something like this happen is just wow. It almost makes me feel better about this crap that's out nowadays. More on those later. That's it. We're done. We're back to more computerish related stuff. That was the sum total of my curiosities about electronics, things along those lines. One last thing, of course, this drive with its busted serial ATA port on the back, sadly. We'll put it out to pasture. Ooh, $20. Not gonna be the end of the world if I get another DVD drive, although the next optical drive that I get will be a Blu-ray drive for Monolith. All in good time, though. All in good time. So, this satiates some of the remaining curiosities related to the great Sift, and puts me a little bit closer to the situation where I could scoot on out of this town if I really wanted to. Declutter, declutter, declutter. And that's all she wrote. By the way, these AA powered soldering irons, I'm having a real hard time wrapping my head around. All that heat from 4 rechargeable AA's? What kind of a world do we live in nowadays? I'm used to those little 30-watt pencil irons that you have to have plugged in all the time. Righto! And of course, maybe I should get a real soldering sponge one of these days instead of wadding up a paper towel and just getting it all damp and stuff. As far as the remaining replacement capacitors from the Samsung kit, I'm going to keep them. You know, maybe I'll have something else of a similar value later on that those caps can go to use for. They'll eventually get their own little bag and the whole 9 yards. So we'll get it all organized a little later on. For now, though, it's been a very long week and a very depressing week, and it did not end well today. TGIF, it wasn't, and it's time to call it a night. And perhaps get around to messing with those speakers tomorrow. Got some plans for these. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.